Welcome to this new adventure we are taking on as an AI staff. We have heard from so many. The conversations that we have are so good that our goal is to let you guys be kind of a fly on the wall to these conversations we have every single day. And so we're going to talk about sexual wholeness and what we believe is sex is good and given to us by God,
That's
but
right.
Satan has twisted that, hasn't he, Anthony, in a lot of different ways. And we're going to talk about that. But if maybe you're a parent watching or listening, this is probably age appropriate around 13 and above, maybe 12, depending on the conversations you've had with your kids beforehand. But kind of on this podcast, we're going to talk about really taboo subjects that you might not have heard in church. We're going to talk about sex. Like the word sex has some pretty not negative connotations in churches. But we're going to do our best to honor the Lord while navigating these really difficult topics. There may be a pun or two that is inevitable. So just bear with us on that, but we're going to do it hopefully in a godly way. But today I am with Anthony Gonzalez, as we call him. He's the team leader for our AI Sexual Wholeness. And I think I've told you this before, Ant. I have mad respect for you because you have absolutely worked your tail off to regain the goodness of sex in your own personal life and marriage, and then you're on a mission to do it for other ministers and men. So I want you guys to hear a little bit of his story, and then we're going to talk about this really incredible approach he has called Holy Judo, which I love that name because I always use this warfare and fighting mentality, and Anthony's done a real good job with that, and I know it'll bless a lot of you in your own fight. So Ant, dude, what's your story, man? Give us an insight into your kind of sexual brokenness and then your pursuit of wholeness.
Sure. Well, first, thanks, T-Mac. The respect is mutual. I'm grateful for your leadership and the story God's been writing in your life and how he's leveraging your journey to help other men as well, as you've been leading some groups and your effort within AIA and beyond. But really grateful for this podcast. I want to add my welcome to you as you're listening in and watching. It's an honor to share our stories and allow God to use whatever he wants from it for his glory and for your good. So I grew up in Miami, Florida, born and raised there. A little bit of context for me. My parents came over from Cuba. And so my brother and I were raised by Cuban immigrant parents. And my mom became a single mom early on in our family life. And she found the church, basically heard that there was free childcare on Sunday mornings. And she was like, I'm in. And that's how I started getting raised up in the church. And but at the same time, in my spiritual growth from childhood, there was also some sexual brokenness that was introduced early on. I was shown pornography by a neighborhood boy, and later on in life, recalled through therapy that there was some more things that boy had done to me as well. It crossed some boundaries and took advantage of me in ways that shouldn't have happened. And so introduced to sexual brokenness at a very early age. But then as I became a teenager, is the time in my generation when the household computer became a new thing and the dawn of home internet created vast opportunity from sexual brokenness choosing me as a child to now me choosing it back as a teenager through online pornography, chat rooms, all the sorts. And as I went from high school to college became the darkest years of my life because the advent of the smartphone and skyrocketed the accessibility, affordability, and supposed anonymity of pornography use. And so I began to amass a porn library and was acting out daily, multiple times a day, like missing class. And it was really affecting like my life and rhythm, but I felt a dependency on it to cope with the stress and anxiety of manhood and moving into adulthood. But very few to no people knew, even though I was in the church and part of Bible studies. We had some pseudo accountability stuffs put in place, but it really wasn't enough to address the totality of what was forming in my life, be it an addiction. Fast forward, I meet my now beautiful wife, Brittany. We're dating. I open up to her about the struggle in my life. And this was kind of her first Christian relationship. She didn't grow up in the church. So for her, she was like, wow, that's huge that you would even tell me and think that's a problem, which is a whole separate conversation. A lot of people in our world don't even see porn or masturbation or these things as an issue. Well, guess what? It is. And we'll probably unpack more of that through podcasts like this. About not just from a Christian perspective, like even secular science is coming to the same conclusions that this stuff is destructive to marriages and relationships, even when both are agreeing to do it together. It's not healthy. It's not good.
I always tell people it's funny how science is always catching up to the Bible.
That's right.
And atheists will look at me and go, what do you mean? And I'll say something exactly like that. Go ahead.
Yep. So I digress. I disclosed to Brittany. She thanked me for it. But as we dated longer and grew in greater intimacy and commitment to one another, anytime I did have a struggle and she learned about it, it was more painful to her. And she was confused as to why. Well, soon enough, we learned that part of that brokenness had existed in her family. And she began to realize more and more she didn't want that in her to transfer from her family of origin to now her family of procreation. You know, she's going to marry God. This isn't what she wanted in her marriage. Yeah. And she told me that. And that brought the seriousness of my work to the next level because I don't want to lose her and I don't want to lose a relationship. So I began to see a counselor, started getting some help in this area, and started finding some lapses of abstinence and some freedom from the behavior. Little did I know at that time, there was much deeper work to be done, which I'll get to in a moment. So we got married. I became a pastor, a seminary student. We had our first child very early in our marriage. And so I'm new to being a husband, father, pastor, seminary student. All these new roles and responsibilities came with tremendous weight and burden that began to reveal the cracks of my masculine soul. And I once again started to turn secretly to pornography and other forms of sexually acting out to kind of cope and survive from the stress of my onstage life. My backstage life was in chaos, to the point where one day I'm driving, Brittany's using my phone to look something up, and she stops. And me parked, I parked at a parking lot. We were going to stop to grab some food. And she stops. She goes, "Aunt, what is this?" And immediately I knew what she had seen. My heart rate was accelerating. My palms got sweaty. My face was flushed. And I played dumb. And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And she showed me porn was on my phone. And she said, "What is this?" And I'm scrambling for thoughts. And that was my moment to take ownership, to be a man and say, "Hey, this is what's been going on." But instead I cowered back and I lied. And I said, "I don't know what's going on. I updated it recently. Maybe brought some old stuff back, or someone hacked my phone." And there was so much trust in our relationship that she bought it. She believed me. And then that moment I realized like I really had created a divide. The wedge was now deep in my marriage. And this was not going to end well if I allowed it to continue. So eventually I came back around and disclosed and said, "Hey, what you found, it wasn't an accidental. I had been looking at porn that day." And more questions came up from her that eventually led to disclosing completely everything. It took time. I didn't do it very well. I wish I could say I courageously shared everything up front. But inevitably I shared, not only with her, but then the pastors of the church where I was serving in ministry leadership. And everyone took a tremendous posture of care and said, "Anthony, we want to see you get well. We want to see you get the help you need." So at that time, my counselor recommended a ministry called Faithful and True out of Minnesota. Then it was led by Mark and Debbie Lacer. Mark has since passed away, but still a fantastic ministry. I went to their men's workshop. Brittany went to their women's workshop. We went to the couples workshop. We did counseling individually. We did counseling together. I was in a support group. She was in a support group. Man, we did whatever it took for as long as it took for me to find freedom and healing. And I discovered things from my story, wounds that I had carried, false core beliefs that I had been believing, but I'd never really taken the time to investigate, that allowed me to really do that deeper soul work, to not just find freedom from the behavior, but freedom for a life in Christ and for fulfillment.
That's good.
And so I've been walking, to wrap it up, 8 years since that journey has started, and have been walking in sobriety since then. Still have times where I feel tempted and struggle, but God has allowed me to come up with a strategy that has helped me effectively fight back and take advantage of the momentum of temptations that come at me to grow even deeper with God and my relationship with my wife. And so I'm excited to unpack that more.
Dude, I love asking this when, especially when guys first share their sin, which you and I are in relationships with guys where they do that left and right. And I ask this question, I'll ask it to you. Do you regret confessing your sin?
I do not. It
That's the
was,
answer everybody gives. It's
yeah,
100% across the board. Now, are there consequences? Absolutely.
yeah.
But nobody ever regrets confessing and repenting because yeah, there's pain and stuff to work through, but man, God used it in incredible ways. I love what you said. I wrote it down because this is true in every man's life. Sexual brokenness chose me, but then I started choosing it. That was good. I've never heard you say that. So I wrote it
Yeah.
down. Dude, I remember in
Take it.
fourth
It's
grade.
yours.
Yeah. I remember in fourth grade, there was an invention competition at my school, my public school that I was at. And I wanted to make some silly thing for like the desk that we all had where to get, because there's never enough room where I could like bring in this extra drawer and make more space out of magnets and wood and stuff. It was a great idea in my mind. Terrible idea in reality. But I sat outside in our garage sawing strips of wood to make all the pieces that I needed. And I worked my tail off, hours of my life. No joke, hours. And I put it together and I was proud of it and it was incredible. And then my uncle walks up to my dad and says, why didn't you just give him the circular saw? Now, if you don't know, a circular saw is a power tool where all you have to do is go and it gives you the piece of wood that you need at the length or whatever that you need at the width.
Not only is it faster, but it's straighter.
Exactly. I'm out there as a fourth grader and I was blown away. I kind of got the job done, but man, there was a better tool out there. And I think that's what you've done is you created a really cool tool that you call Holy Judo. And so, yeah, unpack that a little bit. What is Holy Judo and how do you use it? Because I think guys will get a lot from it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Holy Judo is a response to a temptation or trigger that we face. And in Christian circles, there's common ways we're taught on how to deal with temptation. I want to affirm temptation is not sin in and of itself, but if not dealt with well, it will inevitably lead to sin in our lives. And in the church, I was often taught like, hey, when you face a temptation, here are the things you do, right? You flee from it. You can run away. You turn your thoughts to, God's word. Turn your thoughts to heaven. Replace your thoughts. And when it comes to sexual wholeness stuff, maybe like you're seeing a girl, or for girls who are struggling with sexual brokenness, you see a guy, and there's the opportunity to bounce your eyes. And I think that that's a good practice. It's a temporary solution to a long-term problem. But man, for the first time, I started realizing like, okay, if I flee the temptation, what do I do when the temptation's still coming after me? And I've walked away from maybe the room, from the environment, but it's still in my head. What do I do with that? How do I process that? And Mark Laser told a story that has always stuck with me. He used the film Saving Private Ryan. And for those of you who haven't watched the film, it's a bit mature, so it's a little bloody, a little gory. But there's a scene in which Tom Hanks's character is leading his platoon through some enemy territory to find and save this private named Ryan. And that's their mission, is to bring him home to his family because he's the last surviving member of his generation, of his siblings. And so Tom Hanks's character comes across an enemy German soldier, and they're deciding what to do with this guy. And they're kind of debating between like shooting him and killing him or sending him off in a different direction. And they're kind of going back and forth, arguing over it. Inevitably, they decide they're going to send him off. They're going to blindfold him, have him walk X amount of paces, and they're going to continue on their mission. And they go on. And I think so often we deal with temptation that same way, where we're faced with this issue and we're trying to decide, like, how do I just kill this thing? Or how do I just send it away and for me to just keep on going with my life? Sadly, in the film, spoiler alert if you haven't watched it, but it's been out for so long now, I think it's okay to say this.
Yeah, exactly.
The enemy soldier that they release inevitably comes back around and ends up being the one to take the fatal shot that takes out Tom Hanks's character. And so often in life, that's what happens to us, where the thing we thought we left behind or we fled from ends up coming back out of nowhere, maybe even years later in a context we didn't expect, and it just takes us out. And this happens, unfortunately, so many crash and burn headlines in Christian ministries, executive leaders who just have this moral failure. And it's like no one saw it coming. It's like, well, if we paid close attention, or they paid close attention to their lives, the signs were there. And so as an alternative, I thought about this holy judo, where what if, and I'm not a military guy, so I'm not trying to speak from experience in military, but it came pretty evident to me that another option with this enemy soldier that they could have done is interrogate him, find out what's his mission, where has he come from, where is he going, what messages is he carrying, take advantage of the opportunity to learn what we can to help complete our mission even more effectively. And similarly, when we face a temptation, we have an opportunity to interrogate it, to ask, what messages is this carrying? Where is this coming from? Where is it going? And what can I learn from this temptation that will help me fulfill the mission God has given me more effectively? I'll give you a quick example. One day I was driving down the road in Miami, and it's a pretty scandalous city, dare I say. A lot of like edgy ads and beautiful people. A lot of it's plastic, but still a lot of beautiful people. And so there was a billboard advertising Brazilian butt lifts. And no lie, a giant woman's rear end is on this advertisement. And I'm driving, so I see it, and I've driven past it, so I'm no longer seeing it, but it had already affected me. My heart rate accelerated, my neurochemicals were firing off, blood's going all sorts of places. And old Anthony would have just took that away and filed it along with other triggers I'd seen in the day to then act out later on. This day, I decided to stop and ask, okay, what is it about that image that's revealing something in me? What am I needing right now? And as I saw that image, it required a little bit of redeemed creativity, but it had me realize that I'm behind this person, kind of pursuing them. And that idea of pursuit elicits this desire for adventure. And I tell you what, Tyler, when I hit on that word adventure, it's like a switch went off. My heart rate decelerated, neurochemicals normalized, and blood went back to normal circulation. And I realized, like, gosh, I'm feeling boredom in my life. I'm desiring some adventure right now. So I did two things. I prayed, said, God, Jesus, help me find adventure in you. Second, I brought it to my relationship with my wife, and I said, I saw something today that helped me realize I'm experiencing boredom, and I want to find adventure right now. She was amazing. She was like, well, let's go paddleboarding this weekend. Let's have an adventure. And I didn't act out.
Dude.
So to summarize it real quick, what the evil one sought to use to take me down ended up becoming the catalyst to, one, deepen my faith in Jesus and build my intimacy with my wife. And it was thanks to that billboard. I leveraged the enemy of the momentum for my good and for God's glory by the power of the Holy Spirit.
Incredible, man. And humble brag, yellow belt judo here as a kid, no big deal. But man, I loved it because I was always a small guy,
right,
against bigger opponents. And that's what you're saying. Like, that's what judo is. You leverage, you said the word leverage several times. You leverage the power, momentum of your opponent to get the win. And that's what you're doing. And I love the word holy. You're doing it in a righteous way. And unpacking what's the driver behind it. Otherwise, yeah, we flee from temptation, but man, it's always going to be there. I love the illustration of Saving Private Ryan. You're going to interrogate it. Now, I'd probably advise guys, like Ant's been doing this for a long time. Do it in a safe place. Like if you're tempted in the middle of your room or alone, go interrogate that with some buddies,
That's right.
Don't fall into greater temptation as you try to unpack that. But man, dude, I think that's so wise. And I think so many guys can latch onto that and figure out the deeper thing that's going on. Like yours in that moment was adventure. So yeah, I think it's incredible. You can't sprint.
All right, can you see that image of a guy being slammed?
Yeah, that's awesome.
There's the holy judo, right? There's an example of judo, and yes, you said it. It's a form of martial arts. The word judo is two Japanese words put together. It literally means gentle way. And as opposed to other forms of martial arts that were that incorporate punching and kicking and attacking. This form of martial arts is all about leverage. It's a form of moving with your opponent and taking advantage of whatever momentum they create to then throw them and use it to your advantage. And this goes back to what James talked about when it dealt with temptation. James 1:13-15, he says, let no one say when he's tempted, I'm being tempted by God. Like, let's not blame God for our temptations, right? For God can't be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own what? It says there, desire. And for me, that's a key word in this holy judo process. Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it's fully grown, brings forth death. Now, some people see desire as a bad thing. Well, Jesus didn't say that. He used desire to talk about how he earnestly desired to eat the Passover with his disciples. And Paul also talked about how he earnestly desired to depart and be with Christ. So deep down, we have God-given desires. And this is what the holy judo process is leveraging the enemy's momentum by the Spirit's power to your advantage and for God's glory.
Amazing.
So I'm going to unpack 4 steps here, and we'll talk about each one. Is that cool with you, T-Mac?
Yeah, go do it, man. This is great.
All right. So the word judo is an acronym. Each letter stands for something. The first letter is J. That stands for jockey. And this is kind of a weird word, but we use it more often than we realize in culture. To jockey, it's a position. It's a word that means to ride, maneuver, or manipulate something to your advantage. This is why a rider of a horse in a horse race is called a jockey. He rides the horse to jockey into position, ideally not last place, but first, right? Yeah. We also use the word jockey when someone manipulates musical sounds that come from a record. They're called a disc jockey. That's right. Or DJ for short, as we often say. He doesn't just passively listen to the music, which, although there's certainly time for that, but he actively makes new music with it. In the same way, instead of letting temptation ride us, we jockey the temptation by putting ourselves into a position to interrogate it and take advantage of it. So here it just says jockey the temptation by putting ourselves into the position to interrogate and take advantage of the attack. So this requires asking questions. What exactly is happening right now? What am I seeing? What are my senses telling me? What am I hearing? What thoughts do I have about it? What meaning am I making from this temptation? What are the feelings residing up in me? Are there past stories this is bringing up? This billboard that I saw, it's reminding me of a previous relationship. Like, acknowledging all that stuff is part of jockeying the temptation. And it may seem like a waste of time, but there's another J word I want to throw in there called journaling. Putting pen to paper to write down what's happening has a really powerful therapeutic and neuro impact because it helps us to slow down and not just act out from the temptation that's happening, but actually interrogate and write out and create space between the event and our experience to articulate what's going on inside of us. So I'm gonna stop there. Questions or thoughts about this first step of Holy Judo to jockey the temptation?
No, I think that's great, man. Have you seen the new iPhone update? It actually has a journal thing, which I think is great. I'm less of a typing out a journal thing and more of a writing thing. It's amazing. Yeah, what comes out. So I think that's great insight.
Yeah, that's a great reminder. Our devices sometimes can be like our demise in this pornography-filled world and sexual brokenness, but also it can end up being a great tool to help us. So absolutely, if we have immediate access to journal something on there, I would recommend writing on paper as well. Yeah. It has a whole different neuro experience when we move our hands in that way. But if you don't have something available, you need something quick, that's fine, use the phone.
Yeah.
All right, the second step after we jockey, the U is to understand. Prayerfully ask the Spirit to help you identify what unmet desire or need this attack is revealing in you. So in the example I gave with the billboard, it was adventure. But for others, it could be, man, I need safety right now. Or a common one, what most guys tell me is, I want to be chosen. I want to be desired. It's like the desire to be desired by someone else. And that's a powerful need. Unmet need inside a person's life. There's a whole list of needs. You can look up, needs, just like there's a feelings wheel, there's a needs wheel out there that you can Google. There's a great list written by Mark and Debbie Lacer in their book, The Seven Desires of Every Heart. You can reference that. The book that I'm working on, where I'm going to be explaining more Holy Judo, I'm writing about 7 hungers of the masculine soul. Adventure is one of them. Sonship is another. And there's a whole list that I'm putting together. So look out for that. So
Yeah.
understanding is a big piece of judo. How have you seen that show up in your own life, T-Mac?
Yeah, man. Understanding is, as guys, we're never taught this stuff, right? Like, oh, you're not, the only thing you're rewarded feelings wise is for like anger and aggression, like
Mm,
that's celebrated as guys, especially we're in the sports world. Oh, good job, man. He's getting jacked up, we don't ever help guys unpack what they're feeling. And so it's suppressed and then it's masked by other things. And that understand piece, probably the biggest one that I run into with guys. And when I put words to it is, and they said, yeah, that's it. It's just boredom. Even though they have
mm-hmm.
the whole world at their hands, they have all this stuff going on around them. They're actually bored.
Right.
And when they understand, because and a lot of it is because we are desiring what your original story was, adventure. And
Mm-hmm.
so,
Yeah.
man,
Yeah.
once I started unpacking things, and it really came through with journaling in a lot of ways. I'm not a good journaler. Just because you're not good at something doesn't mean you should do it, shouldn't do it. And once I started unpacking it daily, man, what am I feeling and why? It was a big deal for me and just my sanctification as a whole. It was incredible.
Yeah. 2 comments on what you just said. One is on the topic of boredom, pornography has a tremendous way of crushing our tolerance for boredom. In other
Mm,
words, as we are looking at images and we click, 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 that is training our brain to want that new novel image every second.
right.
And therefore, to actually have an attention span for something that takes time feels so boring because we're so used to the quick and the novel and the exciting that porn conditions us for. The other thing I want to say is when you mentioned sports, and getting that celebration, that affirmation for releasing your aggression. Affirmation is another one of those needs. And so if we get celebrated, we're going to repeat the things that's being celebrated in us because that meets an unmet need in us to be affirmed for what we do. So that's really good, man. So we're going to jockey the temptation. We're going to understand the deeper need. Next, once we've identified the unmet need, I'm going to direct that need somewhere. So answer the question, where and how can I meet this need in a legitimate way? Because if you go deep enough, it's a God-given need. It's not an evil one. If you go deeper,
That's right.
the evil one can't create anything. He doesn't have his own clay to work with. He's not a creator. He's a created. He's got to work with what God's put in us. And so if you go deep enough, you'll find the good God-given desires in us. And so there's good God-given ways we can meet them in a spirit-filled way. In my case, I went to prayer in God, and then I went to my wife to find adventure. So similarly, man, where can I meet this need for affirmation or this
Yeah.
need for security in a healthy way? I'm going to direct it to the right place. I'm going to move out of isolation and back into community because that's how the wolf gets the sheep. It separates it from the herd, right? So we got to move out of isolation and bring this unmet need to a healthy, safe place.
That's good, man. I had that conversation with the guy yesterday. He was apparently a little shocked at my boldness in some things. And he said that he was very encouraging that God has gifted me in these areas. And I said, well, he absolutely has, but I used it for absolute evil before I
Mm,
was a believer and for my own glory and everything else. But it's because I have inside of me this desire to create good things, make things, impact people. Before, as a believer, it was impact people for my own glory. And now, when God redeems us, man, He shifts that because there is a greater need that He's put inside of us, and they're good, deep desires. And now I can direct that in a holy way and leverage that as we talked about. And man, it gives me what's the word I'm looking for? Just the desire, the daily motivation where life is not boring. I have a purpose is probably a good word. Most
that's
guys
good.
don't have a purpose. I know my purpose because I understand the desires inside of me and I can direct them in a holy way.
That's right. So we're going to jockey the temptation, understand the unmet need by the Spirit's power, direct that need in a Spirit-filled way. And then the last part is own. I'm going to meet that unmet need in a Spirit-filled way and take ownership of this whole process that I'm in. And part of ownership means not just doing it, but growing in my own awareness of the cycles that I go through. Because when we pay attention, oftentimes there's a pattern to our temptations. Maybe we're tempted at similar times a day, or a place that we go to, or right after having a stressful meeting. For me, as a youth pastor, I served as a youth pastor for about almost a decade, and I would run our summer camp. And man, I tell you what, I used to love summer camp. It was a week of just craziness and games and kids giving their lives to Jesus, hearing the gospel, and it was such a high. But guess what would happen after camp for me? It was a deep low.
Yeah.
And that was usually my hardest times, most temptations. Oftentimes, if I would give in, there would be some deep, long binges. And what was going on there? Well, there was a cycle I was going through. After the high was a low. And when I became more aware of it, I took ownership of my story and said, okay, I'm going to put something in place so that after these camps, I have the right support in place. And I'm doing things that are meeting the needs, because I've been giving and serving for a whole week and staying up late. I've been so depleted. So now I need to make sure that I'm doing this process, understanding what my needs are, directing them, and taking ownership of my story. And that's Holy Judo. That's the whole process right there, man.
Love it, man. I think, again, yellow belt here. That means I had to actually go to the dojo a couple times. I want guys to hear you can't just do that, watch this once and just be like, okay, I'm set. Like, it takes training to be a
That's right.
master in this. And
When I did judo as well, which I didn't go very far, but I remember the first move they taught was called the bonsai nagi. Maybe you remember that move, but it's basically a shoulder throw.
Yeah, I know that one. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're throwing them over your shoulder, but it requires digging your hips into their hip. So you're creating that leverage underneath them and using their momentum forward to throw them. And I remember when I first learned to move, I watched the sensei do it, and I was like, easy. So I'm thinking I got it, and I do it, and I just looked terrible, and I just fell down. My opponent was on top of me, and basically I lost,
Exactly.
right? Because I think I got it, 'cause
thing.
I watched it. But instead, in training, like, he broke it down into steps, and there were 4 main steps. You grab the sleeve, you pull it over your shoulder, you take a step between the opponent's legs, you dig your hips in, and then you pull and you throw. Those 4 steps, we had to break it down step by step and just practice the first move multiple times, practicing that first pull.
That's
Then
right.
later we added the second step, pull and step, pull and step, so that we're building the muscle memory. So that when I'm in the midst of a battle and it's hard to engage your prefrontal cortex when the fire is on, you're just going to go into autopilot. We practice step by step, building that muscle memory. Same thing with Holy Judo. You got to practice jockeying. How do I jockey this? I'm going to leverage this. I'm going to leverage this. It builds that muscle. And then I'm going to go deeper to understanding what are my needs. And man, that's one of the hardest questions. Whenever I ask a dude, hey, what do you think you really need right now? I'm met with a blank stare.
Ain't amazing?
Because it takes a lot of time. Most guys have trouble identifying someone else's needs, sometimes even harder for their own need. So that takes time to practice that second step of understanding, let alone then directing it to meet it in a healthy way. So you're right, to your point. You can't just see it once and I got this thing, I'm a master at it. You got to build to it. You got to practice it.
Yeah, and you need a master. You need somebody to walk alongside of you to train you in the steps. So don't think that you can do it on your own. So as we wrap it up here, Ant, you and I are in the business of training and equipping really ministers to walk in sexual wholeness so that they can go do their jobs extremely well to the glory of God. So I know we're going to pump this out to crew and AIA staff. I know some other ministries that are excited and want to share this with their staff. We've seen a lot of staff come out of the darkness and walk in the light, and it has been incredible.
That's right.
Absolutely. I mean, you and I could talk for days on this. What's one thing you would say to one of our staff or another minister staff or another, 15, 20 years ago, Ant youth pastor who's just sitting there stuck? What would you tell them right now?
I want to just piggyback off what we were just saying is, just as in a martial arts, you have a master, you have a sensei, and you have people you're sparring with. I think it's finding that person who's further down the road. Maybe that's a sponsor, maybe that's a mentor in this area that you can be fully honest and disclosed to. And ideally, not just someone who's like a great pastor at the church, although those could be great options, but someone who has some form of experience in this area, maybe even a little bit of certification, that they've been trained through another ministry like Freedom Fight or Faithful and True or Pure Desire. Those are great places to start. And each of these ministries offer groups. So that's the other part in martial arts. It's not just you one-on-one with the sensei. You've got sparring partners. You've got other people you're practicing with, and they're practicing with you, and you're fumbling over these skills, but you're getting the practice in. And so similarly, find a group that already exists. And so there's Freedom Fight groups, Pure Desire groups, Faithful and True groups. Within AIA and Crew, we have sexual wholeness groups that are available for you. So if you're a ministry leader in AIA, I'd love to meet you and answer questions you have and plug you into existing groups we have for not just interns, but full-time staff at the senior level, executive level, all different levels. We want to plug you in to have someone to walk with you and a whole community, a cavalry of guys who are in the mission with you.
That's so good, bro. Well, I know your heart and grateful for you. And it's amazing how God's worked both of our stories to lead us separately into the same vision for ministers and crews. So thanks for coming on today, bro. Thanks for your time. I think we're going to do a lot more of these. And I can't wait. I can't wait to see the guys who man up probably for the first time in their life and just send that text of, hey, I want to talk more. Because like we said earlier, they won't regret it. I'm still looking for the guy who confesses sin and regrets it. Still looking for him. Haven't found him yet. So Anthony, that's incredible. Thank you for being here. I think we're going to do this a lot more because I think we have a lot to share and guys want to and need to hear it. With that understand piece, this is going to be a great place for them to land and start to understand what's going on. So thanks for being here, guys. I'm telling y'all, reach out to Anthony. He's an incredible resource. He's got even other resources. You have a website, Ferret Flush. Is that one way they can reach out to you?
Yeah, I know it sounds like a really random thing you just threw in there, but my wife and I made a card game, and there's resources that go with it called Ferret Flush. It helps you grow in your mental and emotional health as well as your spiritual health. So ferret like the animal, Ferret, flush like a toilet, FLUSH.com. There's resources there, but we'll be rolling out some more stuff. But you can just reach me, Anthony.Gonzalez@athletesinaction.org.
That's right, man. So thanks for being here again, dude. You guys be bold. Remembering you can't screw it up because you're not powerful enough. Thanks for listening.
Thanks.